Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben, and today we'll be starting round 2 of the manga tournament with Blood on the Tracks Volume 2 versus The Promised Neverland Volume 2. Let's get into it. I went ahead and made a visualizer for my compile scores, and it'll be down here as I go through the various discussions of the compile ratings, and then at the end we'll take a look at it, blow it up full screen, and talk about the raw score and the score out of a possible 10. We'll start with Blood on the Tracks Volume 2. So this one, for characters, I'm giving it an 8. I felt like there wasn't a lot of difference of character development from Volume 1 to Volume 2. Like, we're maintaining a lot of consistency in this title. But the moments with Fukishi in here, Seiichi's love interest, essentially, was really cute, genuine, and honestly very tragic, the way that this volume ends. For atmosphere, I'm giving it a 7. There's a lot of tension throughout the volume, but it does have this same slow, methodical pace that Volume 1 did. It feels like things are not happening, or things are happening very slowly. A lot of the development of character is through eye contact or lack of eye contact, body language, a lot of non-verbal cues. And so if you're not slowing down to take those in, it does read very quickly, and I could see some feeling like not a lot is happening within a single volume of the manga. For writing and art, again, so much is conveyed through body language. It's actually incredible the way that the author has structured these panels, structured these scenes where you can feel the tension in a room because everyone's heads are slightly bowed. You can feel the communication between mother and son with just a hand on the shoulder, and like the zoom in on it, that contact being released, what deeper implications that might have. The hatch shading, once again, does an excellent job of conveying emotion, although there were a few points where it kind of got out of hand. It kind of went a little bit overboard and was distracting. There's one panel in particular where there were all these horizontal lines for the hatchwork shading, just the eyes suspended below a hat, and it looked silly. It looked odd. There are also a few moments in here where a character was very sad or putting on a big smile, and the faces felt almost like wax-like. They didn't feel realistic. When they have these extreme emotions, it took me out of it a little bit because the faces were so contorted. The panel layout here and the way the story is told is very cinematic. So I felt like that was another strong point, is the way that one panel leads into the next, the way that pacing is done through the layout of a page, all very strong. For plot, I'm giving it a 7. This is a slow burn mystery. It is moving at a snail's pace. And just like I mentioned with some of the other elements here, a lot is being conveyed through these glances and through nonverbal communication. It's all wonderful. It's amazing, but it also feels very slow. And again, it feels like not a lot's happening within a given volume or within a given chapter. Some of the motifs introduced in Volume 1 were definitely strengthened in this volume, and there was a very clear new source of conflict that was introduced late into the book that I'm interested in seeing how it plays out in the future. But overall, I've wished that more was happening. It feels, again, very plotting, very slow. Intrigue gets a 10. I am deeply invested in what is going to happen next in this story. It is grounded in reality. It feels like such a perfect family drama story. There was a nightmare sequence within the book that was very well done and very creepy. And I shudder to think what will happen if we ever get to a point where the mother is not putting up this mask for those around her when she is revealing her true self. So far, we've only gotten hints of it, hints of her true personality, but I am thinking eventually that's going to come out in a more direct way. Relationships get an 8. I feel like there's only one relationship in here that we're really deeply exploring, and that is between Seiichi and his mother. It is such a fully realized relationship, and one that is so twisted and feels, by the end of this volume, feels like it has been crystallized for so long that Seiichi is in a place where he seems fully under the control of the mom. And again, none of this is directly stated. It's just through these actions, through these little glances, and through these little interactions that they have, where he goes along with these things, it really makes it feel like there's a menace behind the mother. And it's really interesting to see how that plays out with, again, so little actual dialogue, so much little actually happening in a volume, that it's just a very intriguing way to tell the story. Overall enjoyment of this volume was a 9 out of 10. My only real complaint with this manga so far is the slow moving pace. It feels like we're just spinning our wheels. It feels like not much is happening, and that's not really true. We're getting a lot through these little moments between the characters, between Seiichi and his mother, between him and Fukishi. And so we are getting this development, but it's so indirect. It's such a different way of storytelling than I'm used to seeing. Honestly, I love it. I love the way that the storytelling is going, different from what I'm used to. And I know some of my complaints with the shonen manga that we were looking at were too much in internal monologue, too much over explaining. And this maybe arguably suffers from the opposite of not explaining enough, but it feels so real. It feels so grounded, and it's really compelling as a result. Overall, Blood on the Tracks Volume 2 gets a raw score of 57, which equates to an 8.14 out of 10. So, strong showing. Surprisingly, I went back and looked after I had read the volume. This is the exact same score it got in round 1. So, I suppose there's something to be said of consistency. The ratings were not all the same, but it ended up with the same score, so I found that kind of funny. Let's see how it stacks up against The Promised Neverland. Promised Neverland Volume 2, we're going to just jump straight into the call pile with characters. I gave characters an 8 out of 10. I felt like Emma's altruism, her need to save everybody, is very clearly painted as a negative thing. It's explicitly called out as a negative trait, and it's one that I don't feel is going to work in the world that they've created. I would be very surprised if there weren't repercussions for this idea that she needs to save everybody. At the same time, Rei's practicality is very clearly painted as that of someone who is a villain. He is painted as more dastardly in this one, as more like shrewd and calculating and uncaring, and I'm on his side. Like, I don't think you're going to be able to save everyone. Let's talk about what we can actually do within the confines of this world and with what we've got to work with. And so I was kind of frustrated by that, especially because, again, in one scene it was called out explicitly that Emma's weakness is her desire to take on these burdens that she can't handle. Like I said with Blood on the Tracks, there is something to be said about consistency. The characters are still as they were written in the first one. These differences in opinion are coming up, and it's good that they are clashing. Slightly concerned that Emma is painted as our main protagonist and is the one who I am not siding with on this particular issue, which seems like a very major one. For atmosphere, I'm giving the book a 7. A lot of the tension in this story is undercut by the fact that these kids routinely discuss these plans in the open. There's even a point where one of the characters yells something out that seems very incriminating, and there don't seem to be any repercussions for these direct outwardly displays of rebellion. And it's a contrivance of the story. Like, they have to talk about it, right? There have to be discussions about what they plan on doing, but especially the part where the kid yells something, or where they have these like shocked things where they're like yelling at one another and there's no one to intervene. It really makes it feel like it undercuts the tension, because it doesn't feel like they're under as much scrutiny as the first volume made it seem. So that's somewhat of an issue. The revelations about Rey in this volume further complicate the dynamics and recontextualize some things that happened earlier in the story, but they actually also undercut the tension because they reveal that there's some insulation of some of these characters, that there are things going on that actually somewhat protected them from the repercussions of what they're doing. And so I feel like that also took away a bit of that feeling, that claustrophobic feeling we had in the first volume. Writing and art, I gave it a 6. I felt like there was a little bit too much of these monologues of how clever the characters are and what all they figured out and who knows what and who's doing what in the story, and not enough of actually moving forward. Again, this is kind of par for the course with this kind of storytelling with these clever characters, especially. So if you think about something like Death Note, where Light had all these monologues about his genius and like what he was going to do and all of his plans and his plots within plots. Now imagine you have 3 people like that, and then 2 other groups that are also like that, and they're all working against each other. And that's kind of what's happening in Promised Neverland. You have to have these things. You have to have these discussions about what all is going on in the world and what people have figured out and where we are in relation to each other and how the plot's going so far. But I felt like it was a little bit too much in this one, and there were definitely points where the information being given or the things being said were repetitive. It would say the same thing 3 times in a single page or within a couple of panels. And so I felt like as a result, it wasn't moving as quickly. Not as much was happening in this volume as happened in volume 1. And so that was a little bit of a disappointment. For plot, I'm actually giving it an 8. I felt like it is doing a great job of moving all these various parts together in a satisfying way. A lot has to go on. Like, there's a lot to consider with all these different characters. There's so many characters. There's so many moving pieces. There's a variation of a trope that I've seen before, or a concept I've seen before that I thought had figured out and still fooled me, and then even after it fooled me, there was another twist to a reveal that happened that kept my interest and was also very surprising. And so that was all very positive. I feel like the plot is very strong. We just maybe could have done a little bit more and not rehashed as much as we did. Intrigue, I'm giving it an 8. I feel like there's still a lot going on in this story that I'm very invested in. One of the major reveals was very compelling, although it in some ways possibly undercuts some other elements of the story. And at least one character is kind of painted as a non-issue, so I'm curious how that's going to play out in the future. But again, there's intrigue in that as well, like this character who is kind of the wild card and doesn't seem like they're advancing the way that they want to. Maybe they'll be pushed to desperation and do something crazy, and that'll throw a wrench in the works of the other forces' plans. So even with the things that I have a little bit of trepidation for, I still feel like it was overall fairly strong. Just a couple of hiccups that could have been maybe smoothed over a little bit. Relationships get a 9 because there is so much going on in this comic. There are so many moving parts. There are so many characters, and I applaud the author for being able to keep everything straight and keep these plots moving, making these reveals that recontextualize things that came before while still making sense, and generally moving everything forward, if not at the pace that I would like. I alluded to this with the intrigue section, but I do feel like Crone is the one who comes off the worst in this volume. I just don't see what she's going to do moving forward, because she's shown to be outclassed by the kids and by Mom, and so both the other forces seem like they have an advantage over her. And so I'm curious, like I said, that might lead to kind of a wild card situation where she does something unexpected, but right now I just don't quite see where what role she plays in the larger story. My overall enjoyment of this volume was a 7. I'm still really interested in the series overall, but I felt like this volume was a little bit too mired in these clever monologues. Despite having a lot more prose than Blood on the Tracks, not an awful lot happens in this volume. While the major reveal in the story does recontextualize volume 1, it arguably lowers the stakes of the story, tilting the balance of power in the favor of the children. This is exacerbated by very little screen time from Mom in this one. She doesn't do a whole lot in this volume, and there's kind of a reason given as to why that is. It plays into this reveal partway through, but again, that reveal further hampers it, and so that's problematic. It may very well be the intention of the author to be pushing that balance of power toward the kids, to be giving us this like glimmer of hope that they're going to pull this off, and maybe we'll have a rug pull in a later volume and reveal something that they didn't consider, which I think would be a very shrewd move. But as it is, the second volume really does undermine some of the things that the first volume was doing, because the tension is lessened somewhat by events that happen in this part of the story. I feel like if you look at it as its own volume, it's not as strong as volume 1. The Promised Neverland ends up with a raw score of a 54, which is the equivalent to a 7.72 out of 10. And so by a mere 3 points, it is going to be beaten out by Blood on the Tracks. And Blood on the Tracks will be into round 3 of the tournament. I hope you enjoyed this first match of round 2 of the manga tournament. I hope you stick around for subsequent weeks when we'll be looking at the other titles that made it past round 1 and see what Blood on the Tracks is going to face off against. As always, I hope your reading journey is going well. Please like, comment, and subscribe so we can grow this corner of our YouTube community. And until the next one, take care.